Hi everybody, I'm Brian. Let's go do some woodworking. Tear out. So everything seems to be working good, and I'm going to go ahead and sharpen the blade before I completely put this back together again. Okay, so I'm over here at my grinder, and I don't typically use any fancy jigs for grinding. You can do a number of different things. There's lots of different tools you can buy. I have one of these that I'm going to set up at a later time. It's an adjustable tool rest, which does basically the same thing I'm going to do right now. I have a piece of plywood on here, two-sided tape, stuck to the stock tool rest. And I do that because my tools slide nicely on it, and I don't scratch anything on the metal. Now, I can adjust this really easily by tapping on the top, or tapping on the bottom, and using a little hand pressure, and I can micro adjust the angle that I've got. And what I'm going for is a scratch pattern dead center on the blade. And once I've got that adjusted so that it's grinding on the center, then I know I'm right where I want to be. So I'll go ahead and grind this, and we'll go back to the bench. You'll see me holding this onto a piece of cast iron occasionally, and the reason that I'm doing that is because it's acting as a heat sink and pulling the heat created by the grinder out of the metal. I don't want to affect the temper in the blade. So as I'm grinding this, I have my light here so I can see what I'm doing, and I'll try to get it so that you can see this. I'm trying to keep it straight. I don't want to have an arch. So I'm watching this top edge and making sure that I haven't ground too far in one spot and too little in another. And I want a nice straight line across the top on that shiny surface. So I still need to sharpen this, but I have now hollow ground it. And what that means is there's a cup in the middle of the grind. So when I sharpen this, I'm going to use this heel and the edge as my guide on the stone. And you'll see how that works in a second. Now, I'm using cast iron as a heat sink to pull the heat out of the steel. I don't use water because I've heard that it can micro-temper a blade, change the hardness of the blade, and I don't want to do that. And I'm going to show you with this old chisel here what happens when you over-grind and you're not careful on that edge and you let something get too hot. And I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so you can see here that I have ground that corner on the steel and that it's changed color. There's some blue color in there and some brown color. But any color whatsoever means that you have altered the temper of the steel, which means that you're going to have to take it through a hardening process, which you don't want to have to do. So be careful you don't do that, and that's the reason that I use the cast iron piece next to me as a heat sink. I grind a little bit, I make sure I cool the blade down. I grind a little bit more, I make sure I cool the blade down. And you just don't want things getting hot and getting ruined. Okay, so I've gotten my water stones out here. This is a standard 1000 grit stone. This is an 8000 grit stone. I'm going to start with the coarser grit and finish on the fine grit. My blade is hollow ground, and I want to make a burr on the back of the blade. And a burr is going to feel to your finger almost like a fine little ribbon of steel or a wire just sort of sticking up off the back, and you'll feel it just coming up off the back of the steel there. So I'm going to go ahead and make a burr on the coarser stone. When I'm doing this, the reason that I hollow ground the blade is that I want to apply pressure to it so it's like a teeter-totter. So I know I'm at the right angle because there's pressure on both the heel and the front of the blade. So I'm not picking it up at all. I'm letting it sit right on the bevel that I ground on there. I'm going to alternate pressure as I do this now, just a little bit. Pressure on this corner here, a couple of strokes. Pressure on this corner here, a couple of strokes. Back and forth. The reason that I'm doing that is that I'm introducing what's called camber into the blade. That'll make the leading edge, the cutting edge of the blade, slightly rounded, so that I can scoop from the center of the blade and not get the corners digging in. Okay, so I can feel a little ribbon, and I'm going to move to the finer stone. I want to make sure that I've gotten all the grit off. It's nice and clean. And when I do the finer stone, same thing, sitting right on the bevel, but now I want to create what's called a micro bevel. So I'm going to pick up the back of the blade just a little tiny bit. I'm going to pick that up and pull it back. And that way I'm only sharpening the leading edge of the blade. I don't have to rub all the steel on the whole cutting surface. I'm just doing the tip. And that way I can sharpen something quickly and efficiently. I want that camber, so I'm doing the same thing. Pressure in the middle, and then a little pressure on either side of the blade. I'll look at it, make sure I've got sort of an even polish along the cutting edge. I need a little bit more over here. And the burr is gone. The burr has come off on the fine stone. The reason that it's come off is that the back of my blade has been lapped and is perfectly smooth. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a later video. I want to clean up the back of the blade just a little bit, rub it back and forth, make sure there's nothing on there. It's nice and clean and polished. Then I'll do a couple more strokes with my little micro bevel. Okay, so now I'm going to put my plane back together. I have a nicely sharpened blade. I have a tuned up, nice clean plane that has some wax and oil on it. I want to put a little bit of the waxolite on the back of the blade just to keep it from getting any corrosion on it. And I also want to put a little bit where the adjuster sits so that there's a little bit of lubrication there. And this is just generally good for the steel. Keep it from getting any corrosion on it. And we're going to set this up, put it together, and take a shaving off a board to make sure everything's well adjusted. Okay, so I have my board here. I want to test to make sure that my plane is set up properly. And to do that, I've pushed the blade out just enough so that I can feel it on the edge of there. And I want to start taking shavings off. And I want the shaving that comes off to be in the center. And that has now come out right in the center of the blade. If it was to one side, I can loosen this off a little bit, and I'll take that to one side. To show what that looks like. So the shaving has come out now on this side of the blade, so that's obviously not correct. So I loosen this off, adjust it a little bit. Shaving's too heavy, back the blade off a bit. Shaving's too light. you'll find that you can just play with it just enough till you get a nice little shaving right in the center of the blade. And when it's in the center of the blade, that's where the camber is working for you. I've just taken a nice cut that has no digs anywhere and has just nicely smoothed the surface. So that is tuned up and ready to go. Done.